All righty. Good morning, folks. Thank you very much for tuning in today. I'm News 6 meteorologist David Nazario, and I know if you've caught me over on Take 6 a few different times, I've mentioned I want to make an appearance on camera to finally talk something other than the tropics, but that's what we're going to be getting into, so thank you very much for taking some time out of your late morning, I should say. We're 30 minutes till the noon lunch hour, but thanks for tuning in today. I see some folks already kicking off in the chat, particularly on Just Weather especially. Shane Lee, Mick, and Marley, Time Traveler Karen, Virginia, and so on and so forth. It's great to see everybody in the chat. We're going to be talking all things code red in the tropics. So first and foremost, we're going to get started on the water vapor. If you guys have seen any of my previous live streams, I love to more or less set the stage first and foremost. So what we're looking at here is going to be primarily our equatorial water vapor satellite shot. And the reason I bring this up is to show you that our conditions do seem fairly ripe down there over northern South America, the Caribbean Sea, which is where our area of interest is currently tagged, and over Central America especially. We have that Pacific monsoonal trough that extends out over the eastern Pacific into southern Central America. Lots of moisture activity out there, kind of like a breeding ground, a thriving ground for tropical thunderstorm activity. And now we're waiting for that potentially ever anticipated low pressure area to form somewhere to the south of Jamaica between Maracaibo and Managua. If I'm saying that right, I hope I am. I'm taking a little stab here for a second there, but between Nicaragua and the northern portions of South America, somewhere in that general source region is where we are going to see that formation of a tropical low pressure. More than likely a disturbance. Right now, our models are still fairly finicky on whether or not it will fully organize into our next named storm. However, National Hurricane Center has really boosted our confidence over the last 24 hours up to a 70% chance that this thing does get going within the next 7 days. I also wanted to pull this up. If you've been watching and listening in on some of our news articles, our stories over on News 6, we've been mentioning, both myself and meteorologist Jonathan Kagis, that there is the potential for a backloaded season. We're going to be revisiting that topic very soon. Be on the lookout for that. But as you can see, with all the moisture and the thunderstorms really ramping up down there, that is a sure definitive sign that the MJO, the pulse that we've been waiting for this grand finale of the hurricane season, is finally starting to make its presence known. That's a sure definitive sign of that. Now, moving right along, this is what we have out there for the tropical outlook over the next 7 days. We have two other random areas that just suddenly spawned in. It felt like kind of like a couple of NPCs in a video game. We have a 10 for 10 chance for that area just to the immediate north of the Greater Antilles, as well as a subtropical potential way up there towards the northeast side of the globe. There you can see another 10 for 10 split. This does look like it has taken on subtropical characteristics. So, I'm not going to step on the NHC's toes and say whether or not they should have that a little higher, but that's neither here nor there. Luckily, it's way off the other end of the spectrum here, so we're not going to have to worry too much about that doing anything unless you live up there near UK, parts of Greenland, other portions of Europe, and so on. But let's get to the main event. We are now at a 30% shot, according to National Hurricane Center. This does try to develop into something as we move into the weekend by the latest Sunday. A 70% shot, that code red designation, as we like to say, that this does form up into our next named storm, Patty. As we go through the next week, this time next week, we could have a tropical depression down there. Patty is the next name, as you can see on the list there. Good to see everybody in the chat. I promise I'm not ignoring you. I will open it up for questions as we get deeper into the show, so just stand by. I wanted to pull this up very quickly because if you notice where the peak of the season is in regards to where we are. Now, I would honestly argue with the amount of AOIs and the spins we have in the Atlantic Basin right now, we might want to nudge that peak over just a little bit. That's just my opinion. So I just want to let you know we are on the very bottommost downward descent of the hurricane season at this point in time, which has been very odd to say the least because we've had more named storms in the last month now, I'd argue, than we did most of August and September. This is something I'd love to bring up for everybody who is familiar with not only my usual tropical briefs, but for those of you who may be brand new to a stream hosted by myself. These are going to be our tropical depression probabilities brought to us by the European model. And where I have my analysis marker there is just a little lopsided. This did update right before the live stream, but the reason I had that pulled up is to show you, if you've been tracking these updates routinely for the last several days now, we've gone from a 10-20%, from a 20-30%, 40-50% chance, all the way up to a 70-80% 90% chance that our ensemble members from the Euro do agree that there will be some kind of a tropical cyclone right around the Cayman Islands, maybe to the immediate east of Belize, the Yucatan, and to the south of the western tip of Cuba. From there, that's when things get very wonky. You can see in the blend of probabilities here, a lot of the colors do transition off towards the west, but then there is still a huge blanket effect, if you will, across the Gulf of Mexico. So this is something we're going to keep a close eye on as we go through time. I do think we're going to continue to see adjustments, so we all need to be keeping a close eye on this feature as we go forward in time. This is just a quick glance. We've had some cooling take place in the Gulf of Mexico off our west and east coast. Thankfully, even the shelf waters have come down in terms of their sea surface and subsurface temperatures, but the Caribbean Sea, you can see down there in terms of our ocean heat, is still ripe and ready to rock and roll for tropical activity. So with that MJO coming through in the upper levels, we also have primed and ripe conditions down in the low levels to support an organized tropical cyclone. We're not going to talk ceilings or realistic intensity just yet, because we do still have a number of days before this system can kind of get ahead of us and we can start dialing in our forecast a little bit more. And then finally, last but not least, in terms of our graphics, this is going to be a look at our steering current. Now, pay no attention too much in terms of where those little green arrows specifically go. The reason we have this up, and this was built by our wonderful meteorologist, Michelle Morgan, what we're showing you here are our two possible end results. And right now we have a dominant Atlantic high pressure out over the western and southwestern Atlantic. You can see that high spinning out there off our east coast, just to the northeast of the Bahamas, closer to the Bermuda Island. That is what's going to be in place now. Had this feature developed like initially anticipated back on October 30th, 31st, this system would have likely plowed right through that non-existent high pressure and went up and out to sea after dropping lots of rainfall for Jamaica, Cuba, the Grand Bahama Islands, the Turks and Caicos, as well as Hispaniola. Now that's a totally different ballgame. We have the high pressure reinforcing the steering out there, and then it's just a careful game of timing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that after we come back from our break. But last but not least, before we move on to a bit of a commercial break, we're going to take about 2 minutes here. Just wanted to show you the named storm list. We are at 15 storms total right now, 10 being hurricanes. We haven't exactly seen that hyperactivity just yet in terms of our named storms, as well as our accumulated cyclone energy, the ACE. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that acronym tossed around, whether it be here on YouTube, on News 6, or even just on social media altogether. We're not quite there, but this season, rest assured, as we all are very familiar with, was very impactful. So Patty, and then followed by Raphael, next up on the list. We're going to talk a little bit more about the probabilities. We see Raphael shortly after Patty and the potential impactfulness these storms could have not only on our Caribbean neighbors, but the United States and Central America, coming up right after the break. Stay tuned, folks. Welcome back, everybody. I know that was a very brief little 2-minute break. Decided to catch myself up here and pull this up. These are essentially going to be, before I open up the forum to questions over on our chats here to my left, these are going to be our takeaways here. So for the Caribbean disturbance, that's pretty much all it is right now. It's still just an AOI with that red 30-70 split. The general area for formation is just about locked in. All of our models, every single model at this point, is highlighting that the central and southern Caribbean is likely to produce another tropical low pressure. From there, it becomes a careful game of timing. We could be anywhere between the Yucatan Peninsula, the Cayman Islands, and Cuba around November 7th. Okay, so we still have a little bit of lead time to analyze and scrutinize what our model data does, as well as dial in the forecast for all you wonderful viewers. And then again, at the very bottom there, you can see timing is the key. And when I say the key, I emphasize that wholeheartedly, because when this thing develops, we're either going to catch the back end of that strong dominant high pressure in the Atlantic, and as it moves up towards the northwest, we're either going to catch a reinforcing dome of warmer air, pushing it further to the west and keeping it fairly suppressed to the south, or which pretty much climatology favors, we're going to catch our next trough coming in, and that will eject it up towards the north, somewhere to potentially become an issue for the southeast and central southern United States. So the timing is the key. These are your key takeaway, folks. If you want to take a screenshot of that or take a picture or just kind of lock that into memory, we're going to keep you very updated as we get back from the weekend on Monday. But until then, what questions do we have? I have a couple minutes to kind of toy around and answer any questions that folks may have there in the chat. Marcus Coleman over on News 6, do you think this is one for Miami? Truthfully, Marcus, I don't think so. Where we stand right now, because of that high-pressure ridge I showed you in the graphic previously, I think we are going to see this move a little more west-northwest before it either recurves back towards the north or it gets sandwiched to the south and crashes and burns from all intents and purposes into the Yucatan and then Mexico, kind of like we saw with Alberto and Chris earlier this season. Will Dunedin, did you mean Dunedin or Dunedin, Florida, get this hurricane get weak? William, I'm trying to read your comment to the best of my ability, but first of all, we don't know if it's going to be a hurricane yet. There's been a lot of information circulating social media that Florida should have already seen a hurricane by now, which is why we've kind of pumped the brakes on producing a lot of this information for you all to alleviate any tensions, because this would technically be, I mean, not technically, this would be our fourth system this hurricane season. Yeah, the 12Z icon has been very, very, very back and forth. We're seeing that windshield wiper effect. We went from a major hurricane to almost nothing, and I think the models are still struggling to try to put a system down there and catch up with that strong MJO pulse we have overhead, to include also trying to work around the natural climatology built into these models. We're not usually going to see this type of a setup this time of year, especially given what we have producing this potential system. Yeah, the CMC has been off and on with a strong week, which makes sense. We're going to see that windshield wiping effect with with intensity, especially since we don't have anything down there quite yet. Once we do start to see thunderstorms form up, no low pressure, just the thunderstorms themselves, the models will then finally begin to hone in on that general area and have a better grasp on what this thing will do. But truthfully, in terms of ingredients, they're all there. Moisture's there, the upward motions are there, the shear is very lax down there. So to get development, I don't think is going to be a struggle. I really do think, however, from there, this could be a trickier forecast, and a lot will hinge on when it decides to get going, so then we can nail down timing. Mick and Marley, it kind of does. That I have thought about Vince on occasion, but in this case, we are definitely going to see a little bit more model agreement. We have a lot more model agreement this time, whereas Vince last hurricane season, we had mainly just the GFS showing something again and again and again until it just dissipated it altogether. So KMA model showing a strong storm in the Gulf. KMA, any good model? The KMA is okay. You know, I'm not going to swear by it just because it forwards that, oh, this is a significant system type of agenda. No, but it's definitely a tool that I utilize in my tool belt, and I'll call them the lesser known global models, like the Korean model, the UK model, the Australian model, the Navy model. They all have development in that same general area, which is why on the key takeaways I'd mentioned, we're just about locked in. William, what is the weather looking like for November 7th and the 11th? Well, the 7th, we should be pretty good per the key takeaways. We're probably just looking at mild conditions, general humidity here in Central Florida. Then by the 11th, per some of our ensemble guidance, that's when we'll really need to see what happens with this feature. It'll either be clear blue 42, or we might have some tropical rainfall to do battle with. It is possible the system could move into Central America. I buy into that, yeah, PM. I definitely buy into that. If this thing stays weak and struggles, then it will probably crash into Central America, Mexico, and become nothing more than just a heavy rainmaker for them, unfortunately fueling that flood threat down there. But as of right now, Scrooge McDuck, correct. The UK is also showing development and moving up generally towards the northwest. So I would argue that where we stand right now, I can confidently tell you guys before we get ready to wrap up, this is likely to form somewhere in the Central Caribbean over the next 7 days, start to lift north before recurving back towards the west. And then once we get to just about the inlet of that Yucatan Channel, that's when we'll really need a feature on the board so we can start to dictate how it's going to be influenced by the steering patterns around it. But with that being said, folks, thank you so much for being such a spectacular audience. I do appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in for our live stream this morning. We're going to start to host these on a bit more of a repetitive basis right around this time. So definitely turn those notifications on. Consider clicking subscribe or downloading our News 6 app so you don't miss an upcoming weather update, regardless of if it's tropical season or not. And we will see you again next time. Please feel free to drop any questions, comments, or concerns in the comments section down below upon the conclusion of this live stream. But have a wonderful rest of your Friday. We'll see you again soon, everybody.